Today, we talk about Hellblade, inner demons, and schizophrenia.
Come and watch. And bring your sword.
For those who have not played Senua's Sacrifice, we suggest you play the game and then return here, unless you don't mind spoilers. Ninja Theory's Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, is not your normal Viking fights demons and gods adventure game. From the beginning to the end, Ninja Theory's development team focused intently on understanding mental illness and the experiences of those that battle the condition. Today, we explore the possible brain differences in someone with mental illness, as well as whether Hellblade successfully portrayed the experiences in an accessible and meaningful way. Early on, it's clear that Senua intends to honor her lover's memory by carrying his decapitated head to Helheim in hopes of putting his soul to rest. From Senua's perspective, the gods place trials in front of her. Whether these trials are allegorical inner demons she faces, which the player fights in combat, or simple magical puzzles, Senua faces trial after trial in an attempt to finally lay her lover to rest. The experiences in her mind dictate the actions the player has to take, such as listening to instructions from spirits around her.
Mind, where can you go? You're failing. Find another way. Think. Focus. Use your mind.
Or finding patterns in a room to unlock a door. Schizophrenia is defined as a chronic health condition that results in functional impairments due to disruptions of mood, thoughts, and perceptions accompanied by social withdrawal and bizarre behavior. Approximately 1% of any given population will have schizophrenia. With some exceptions, only 2 of the following symptoms need to be present for 1 month, with signs of disturbances that last for at least 6 months in order to receive a diagnosis of schizophrenia. They are hallucinations, delusions, disorganized speech, disorganized behavior, flat affect, alogia, and avolition. Senua, our protagonist, begins our journey by narrating her history, but not exactly how you would think. Senua hears her history being narrated. As the game opens, it is clear that Senua experiences several of these symptoms, such as auditory,
Take everything. They're not yours anymore. They're going to take everything you have.
and visual.
Where are we? There he is. There he is. The light. Go towards.
Hallucinations. There are notable exceptions that could result in a schizophrenia diagnosis, in where only one symptom needs to be present. And these exceptions are if the delusions are particularly bizarre, or if auditory hallucinations exist where a voice maintains a running commentary, or 2 or more voices are conversing with each other. This occurs for Senua throughout the story. For example, she hears voices similar to her own who converse with one another during times of stress. The exact cause of schizophrenia is unknown, but there seems to be both a hereditary and environmental component to developing this medical condition. Again, while the exact reason for why people develop schizophrenia remains elusive, researchers have discovered that schizophrenia is associated with chemical and structural brain abnormalities. In order to understand the brain of those affected with schizophrenia, we need to first look at what may be happening at the molecular level. Our brain consists of brain cells, and those cells responsible for communicating information to other cells are known as neurons. An electrical signal is needed for neurons to communicate with each other. For people without schizophrenia, it's likely that these cells communicate with each other without much trouble. But, as we'll see in a moment, many of Senua's symptoms may arise from a miscommunication within these cells. A neuron receives an electrical signal, and this signal runs along the dendrite to the cell body, down the axon terminal to the synapse. It is here that the electrical signal is converted to a chemical one. Once stimulated by the electrical signal, the synaptic vesicle at the end of the axon releases chemicals into the synaptic cleft. These chemicals are called neurotransmitters, and neurotransmitters have specialized receptors, which are located on the postsynaptic dendrite, also known as the dendrite of the neuron receiving the information. In the past, we've explained that if you consider a receptor to be a lock, the neurotransmitter is the key. Essentially, neurotransmitters stay in the synaptic cleft until their locks, those receptors in which they fit, are ready to receive information. This transfer of information in the form of neurotransmitters binding to their receptors activates or inhibits the receiving neuron. Here's how the transfer of information from neuron to neuron may be different for Senua. For her, 2 neurotransmitters have been implicated in schizophrenia: dopamine and glutamate. Let's look at our first neurotransmitter that may be responsible for what Senua calls the darkness: dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter responsible for regulating our reward system, emotional responses, and movement. Regarding schizophrenia, The dopamine hypothesis posits that schizophrenia is a result of excessive activity of dopamine receptors, specifically those dopamine receptors located in the mesolimbic pathway. Indirect evidence has supported the dopamine hypothesis, at least regarding positive symptoms of schizophrenia, things like visual hallucinations and hearing sounds. For example, typical antipsychotics such as chlorpromazine act on the D2 dopamine receptor by blocking this receptor, temporarily preventing the binding of dopamine onto those receptors. Thus, in schizophrenia, dopamine may not stay in the synaptic cleft for a long enough time due to the overactivity of these dopamine receptors. Researchers believe there may be another reason Senua experiences these symptoms. This reason accounts for both positive and negative symptoms of schizophrenia, and that is the glutamate hypothesis. Glutamate is responsible for activating brain areas related to emotions and sensory information, since some of these symptoms include flat affect, such as when Senua shows no emotion, or inappropriate affect, such as when she laughs at someone's death. This hypothesis suggests that one receptor type for the neurotransmitter glutamate, the NMDA receptor, is underactive. Indirect evidence has supported this hypothesis. The drug phencyclidine, also known as PCP, when consumed, mimics both the positive and the negative symptoms of schizophrenia, and that's because the drug is an hallucinogen. PCP is an NMDA inhibitor. This means that when PCP binds to the NMDA receptor, it blocks it, as opposed to activating the receptor. Thus, schizophrenia symptoms may be the result of underactive NMDA receptors. These hypotheses may help explain some of the symptoms manifested in schizophrenia. However, the picture remains incomplete, and there are other brain differences. Not only may there be differences at the cellular level, but differences have been seen regarding brain structure between people with schizophrenia and healthy people. Researchers have discovered that the schizophrenic brain appears to show signs of atrophy, or death of neurons, and that the most affected areas are those areas responsible for emotion, attention, and perception. Also, researchers have seen diminished activation patterns in the frontal lobes of people with schizophrenia. Now that we have a basic understanding of schizophrenia, let's return to Senua. Senua's constant battle with her inner voices telling her to give up and surrender permeate the story, and help us understand some of the symptoms experienced by people struggling with severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia. If you understand anything about mental illness, you could tell from the beginning that our character was in an active state of psychosis. The most striking aspect of the game was the accuracy in which an active state of psychosis was portrayed, particularly when it comes to auditory, hearing, hallucinations. These kind of hallucinations can often be the most intrusive and the most prevalent symptom. Arguably, this is a primary feature of Senua's psychosis. Other features of Senua's psychosis include repetitive behavior, such as repeating those rune puzzles throughout the game, visual hallucinations, like the guide who keeps shifting in and out of her view, tactile hallucinations, such as feeling the growth of a curse on her arm, which, by the way, is also a delusion, and finally catatonia, defined as psychomotor immobility, or the inability to move or respond. All of these symptoms may appear in someone with schizophrenia. It is worth noting that there are time frame requirements for the final diagnosis. One must experience one or more of these symptoms for a month, and similar disturbances for 6 months. However, we can rely on additional clues to the diagnosis, such as a familial history.
That's her mother. Senua, you have the sight, just like I do.
The magical battles with demons, rune puzzles, terrifying monsters, and the darkness may not be the actual experience of someone suffering from these symptoms. However, they are a good analogy for the inner demons Senua lives with and battles with every day. Many of us know the struggle with our own inner demons. So understanding the struggle faced by those with schizophrenia may help us better understand the world through their eyes. Better understanding of Senua's experience and why this happens can help us improve our mutual world by acting in a more loving and compassionate way, especially in regards to mental illness. Did you learn something new in this episode of Brief Brain Facts? If so, comment below. And if you liked what you saw, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to hit that like button. As always, thank you for watching.